Hi, and welcome back to Expert Talks. I'm Agathe Ducar, and today we are with David Metcalfe, who is the CEO of Verdantix, and we're going to talk about the rise of ESG and how it became top of corporate agenda. David, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here.
So David, the ESG has been rising up to the top of corporate agenda really quickly, and people are surprised by it. Why do you think?
That's definitely true that the sudden rise of ESG in the last 3 years has been surprising, especially because we at Verdantix have been covering climate, ESG, sustainability since 2008. And from 2008 to 2018, it was a very gradual increase in awareness and engagement. Then suddenly everything changed and the market hit an inflection point. So the question is, why did this inflection point happen? What was behind it? There are multiple things. At the UN negotiations on climate in 2018, climate scientists came out and declared a code red because they realized the message that they'd been delivering wasn't really getting through in terms of the rapidly increasing risks from climate change. One of the other things that we then saw was social trends like Black Lives Matter, so big protests, where executives realized that they had to respond to that. The COVID pandemic then kicked in, and amazingly, through the COVID pandemic, the volume of cash going into ESG funds doubled in 2020 compared to 2019. So that was $580 billion went into ESG funds that year, and it's continued to increase. So the inflection point, I think, has been driven by this long-term build-up of awareness, and then multiple factors that really accelerated action.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And we see some differences between Europe and the US in terms of ESG. Do you see any challenges for company because of it?
There are definitely differences. So the two ones that we see at the moment, first is in the US there's a big focus on financial ESG. So the financial materiality of ESG factors. Is my business going to underperform in some way because of environmental risks or social impacts or governance failures? That is really the big focus in the US. In Europe, there's this secondary focus which is around impact materiality. So that's more, what is my business doing which is either positive or negative for the planet and society? In Europe, you therefore have this double materiality concept. And that just doesn't really exist, I think, so much in the minds of American executives or investors. The other difference, which is kind of linked to that, is that if you look at ESG performance of European firms versus US firms, then the performance is higher comparing, say, Stock 600 index versus S&P 500. What does that mean in terms of challenges? Well, we think the challenges are going to be with US firms that have a significant operation in Europe. There's a need to catch up with European performance on sustainability, and there's a need definitely to understand some of the European regulations that would look kind of foreign to you if you're a US executive where nobody else really thinks about some of these double materiality ideas.
Yeah, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. For those who would like to leverage their EHS management software for ESG, what would you advise? What would be a first critical step to take?
EHS software is definitely one of the core systems of record or building blocks you could think of for an ESG digital strategy, no doubt about it. But it's not the only one, and there's really a need to think through multiple elements before saying, well, this is how we're going to build out our ESG digital platform. The first one is, what are the regulations over the next 4 years that are going to impact your business from an ESG point of view? Climate, social disclosures, human rights issues, conflict minerals, there's a lot. The second question to ask is, how ambitious is your CEO on the ESG agenda? You put those two things together, you've then got your vision for what you need to achieve with EHS digital platform. And then you can say, well, we have EHS, that's one of the key building blocks here. We will then need to use finance and accounting software as part of our disclosure process, and you may need to bring in some other systems depending on whatever material issues your business has.
Okay. Well, so basically looking at the whole need and vision of your company before knowing where to go from there. Makes sense. So we're talking right now about, everybody's talking about a potential recession next year or, down the road. How do you think it's going to impact ESG funds? Is it going to have a negative or positive impact? What are your thoughts?
There's a lot of trends going in different directions, I think, in terms of what's going on in Europe with energy prices, what's happening in the US, where the recession probably won't be so bad. So one of the negative trends for ESG is that because many of the ESG funds had quite a lot of tech stocks in their portfolios, the tech market has really had the valuation bubble burst at the end of last year. So that's going to mean that fund performance will often not be so great for ESG funds in 2022. That may well slow down the volume of cash going into ESG funds. It definitely won't stop, but you could see a slowdown compared to 2021. Then you have things like the energy crisis in Europe, which is clearly a big part of the recession. And that has a bad impact from the point of view of short-term CO2 emissions, but actually from an even medium-term point of view, very positive impact in terms of energy independence and a focus on huge investments in renewable energy. But like I say, really complex in terms of how we're going to come out in 2024 from the recession and how much of a bumpy ride it will have been for the ESG sector as a whole.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your insight. And again, thank you for joining us on Expert Talks. And thank you all for watching Expert Talks, and stay tuned for more insight on industry topics.